one is to introduce myself and the university a little, and the other is about portfolio preparation. So hopefully you can see my screen. Can you still see my presentation? Yeah, great, okay. So I've actually given presentations about portfolio preparation lots and lots, and so it's nice this time to also be able to talk about some other things. And I think it's rude not to introduce myself. And so my name is Jamie Dobson, and yeah, I'm a professor of design education at the university. And until fairly recently, I was one of the heads of school at the university. But I'm not anymore. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I'm now back to being a designer and a lecturer. And so I'm not really working today. So I've been working on a project this morning for a kind of high-end audio company in the UK. Designing some of the branding for their products. So that's one of the things that I do. I want to talk a bit more about the things that I've done over time though, because this might be useful for you. You might be considering kind of careers in other areas or kind of broad area in terms of art and design. And I think one of the things I want to do through this introduction is just suggest to you that different creative disciplines are kind of more connected than you might appreciate at the moment. So I'd actually studied graphic design before then going to university and doing a degree in architecture. I ended up becoming an architect, but then not really being terribly interested in architecture in some ways. It was too slow when my kind of love was graphic design. And so I worked as a lighting designer for a long time. On projects like this. And so this is one of my sketches of the Millennium Dome. So this is a building in London that was kind of erected as a kind of flagship celebration for the turn of the millennium. So this is the kind of initial sketch. This is what we thought this thing should look like. And then this is the outcome. And another view of it. And it's interesting, I think, because when I was studying architecture, I didn't know even that this was a field, that you could be a lighting designer, you could be a specialist in this way. And the same is true for an awful lot of creative disciplines. There's lots of kind of threads, there's lots of specialisms kind of within disciplines that you might not appreciate at the moment. This is a project called Gateshead Millennium Bridge, designed by Wilkinson Eyre, some architects based in London, but again, I worked on the lighting for this scheme, so as a kind of consultant to the architects. Another bridge, if you've been to London, you might recognise this one. So this is a bridge called Golden Jubilee Bridges, which is a pedestrian bridge that crosses the Thames between Charing Cross Station and the Royal Festival Hall. Another project in London, this time working with Foster and Partners. This is called the Gherkin, or it's actually called 30 St Mary Axe, or Swiss Re. So a tower block. And in terms of the kind of lighting of this is kind of interesting because I became very much more interested in kind of environmental concerns. You wouldn't really believe it from this building. But we persuaded the client that they should allow the building to kind of glow from inside. So it's this kind of light box, and it reveals this form, which I felt was quite a kind of interesting, creative compromise, I suppose. This is the entrance to the building. Another bridge, this is called Bridge of Aspiration. Actually, the lighting is the least interesting thing in this project. This is a bridge for the Royal Ballet School in London. Again, designed by Wilkinson Eyre. And I just love how it dances across the street. It kind of pirouettes across the street. This isn't, if you've been to London again, and if you've been to Covent Garden and you've wandered around there and you've looked up, you may well have seen this bridge. So again, lighting is me. So yeah, lighting is me. And then one of the amazing things, and actually one of the amazing things about working for UCA over the last few years, is the opportunity to travel. So I traveled an awful lot when I was working as a lighting designer. And until COVID, I traveled an awful lot working for UCA. But, and I think maybe this is the point, that you know, this is my kind of backstory in a way, architecture and architectural lighting. But I'm really interested in just being creative, just taking the kind of skills, expertise, interests, and doing something else with them. And so in this project, there's a massive gap here because I went back to university and did an MA in communication design. And after that, and influenced by one of the projects that I worked on when I was doing my MA, me and a friend, a studio mate really, ended up founding this company called Lightvert. And what we can do is we can create these huge kind of illuminated signs in the air that use a principle called persistence of vision. Anyway, so I've included that just because I want to show you how you can kind of jump around. And then the last few projects here are all jumping around. These are all things that I did after doing an MA. So I had this, you know, an awful lot of experience in terms of architecture and architectural lighting. But at the kind of core of that, I guess, is a creative approach that can be applied in lots of different ways. One of the things, another thing that I did was I went to live and work in San Francisco for a while. I worked for a company called Meta Design. And while I was there, I worked on the branding for Adobe Acrobat 8, this stuff. And then I came back to the UK and ended up working for a company called, as a creative and a kind of creative consultant for a company called Fallon, who are an advertising agency. And while I was there, I did a number of projects. And all of the projects that I worked on were about kind of capturing things for real, not kind of computer generating things. And the best example of that is this. Hopefully the film will work. No, film's not going to work. Anyway, so it's this was an advert for Sony. I'm going to go back one slide. Yeah, an advert for Sony, and in the advert we dropped 250,000, or bounced 250,000 bouncy balls down a street in San Francisco, and it became a television advert and won lots and lots of awards. While working for UCA, over the last few years, I've been a creative consultant for Nest, a Google company. And one of the things that I've done, I'm really interested in technology, and an awful lot of my work relates to technology. One of the things that I've done is proposed kind of other and alternate uses for the embedded sensing technology within Nest products. So often really simple things or silly things or things to do with kind of pets or children. But yeah, that's been an interesting project. And then I've been doing a little bit of work for Apple. And so, you know, Apple are an amazing client. And yeah, the work I've done has been related to Apple Music. And so I've produced some images for kind of Apple playlists. And I've made the images using kind of experimental illustration devices. Okay, so that's me. So now I just want to talk a bit about the university. So University for the Creative Arts. I'm not going to take long to talk through this. But we do really well. So I'm not going to go through this information in detail, but we do really well. So we've been Modern University of the Year. We have TEF Gold. In terms of teaching, we are ranked in the top 10. The things that I guess I'm particularly proud of are TEF, absolutely, the Teaching Excellence Framework Gold Award, and employability. So we've done incredibly well in terms of employability. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and until fairly recently, I was head of school for communication design. one of the things that we really developed in the last few years of me being in that role were the kind of links to the outside world and opportunities for our students to gain work on graduation. We offer lots and lots of degrees. All of our degrees are related to the creative arts. Most of them are related to kind of practice in the creative arts. So being an artist or a fashion designer or an illustrator or an animator or a musician or whatever it might be. Some of our degrees now, and over the last few years, focus on kind of support for the creative arts. So they're the kind of, the business heads, the business minds that support the creatives. So that's a kind of interesting twist, I think. And the reason that we've done that is that for every creative person in the UK, and I'm sure that the same is true in other parts of the world, but for every creative in the creative industry, it requires someone else that might support the creative or find work for the creative. And so this is the reason that we've kind of pushed into these other areas. We're in the southeast of the UK, so all of our campuses are, well, within an hour of the centre of London. Epsom is closer, only about half an hour away from the centre of London. Canterbury, which is the furthest away, there's a fast train, but Canterbury is also a lovely small city. We also have 2 satellite campuses, which I'll talk about in a second because they help to give you an idea of how we're different. I'm not going to talk about these things in a huge amount of detail, but there's a slide here about each of our campuses. I think the thing to note is that each of our campuses feels different, and it feels different because of the mix of courses on that campus. And so in Farnham, there's lots of courses, there's lots of students, and the courses represent a very broad kind of range. In Epsom, there are fewer courses. There's still quite a lot of students, but the dominant courses in somewhere like Epsom are things like fashion and graphic design, and so it feels different. Rochester has quite a mix of courses again, actually. Fashion is very dominant in Rochester, as is photography. And then Canterbury. So Canterbury is our smallest campus. It's the home of the Canterbury School of Architecture. And so there are 3 courses that I think kind of rub up against each other in Canterbury that are really interesting: architecture, fine art, and graphic design and illustration. So there's a kind of interesting kind of, I guess, opportunities for collaboration there. Certainly staff do this. And then I mentioned these 2 satellites, and so these are tiny, really. But the reason I like to mention them is that I think they illustrate our kind of commitment to small courses, to kind of niche creative areas, and also to kind of expertise. So, for example, we have a television production course at Maidstone TV Studios. Maidstone TV Studios is a big commercial TV studio. It's the largest in the UK. There aren't any other courses there, but we've got a course there so that our students can use the resource. They can use the TV studio or studios, and they can also get work. So an awful lot of our students work on the productions that take place there. And then at the Royal School of Needlework on the right, why do we have a course here? We've got a course here because it's a world centre in terms of expertise for hand embroidery, particularly, and tapestries. It's at Hampton Court Palace, which was the home of King Henry VIII. And I guess 2 things that indicate the quality of work from here. When Kate Middleton, our princess, was married, she wore a wedding train that was actually made by students from this course. And then costume design from Game of Thrones that won BAFTAs was actually made by students. Again, some of the costumes were made by students from this course. Anyway, in the presentation about me and where I come from, I've kind of missed about 13 years. And the 13 years is this is my student work. This is some of my student work over the last 13 years. And I don't think the videos are going to work again here. We'll see. So I'll just talk through fairly kind of briefly what this is. This is one of my students from graphic design, actually, called Phil Stewart. And when he graduated, he started a company called Preloaded. This is the website for the company. Preloaded are a big company now. If you look at the BBC kind of CBeebies website, there are lots of games. The games are probably made by Phil. They make games, as it says here. They're interested in games that kind of encourage play with purpose, as it says here. So kind of educational games. The other thing they've done, oh, no, not going to work. The other thing they've done, they did a while ago, and they're doing increasingly is VR work, virtual reality work. And so a year and a bit ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, there was an exhibition at the Tate Modern about Modigliani. And as well as having Modigliani's work in the gallery, as you'd expect, there was a gallery where you could sit on Modigliani's chair and you could put on some VR goggles and you can imagine what it was like to be Modigliani in his studio. So interesting piece, I think. Malika, so another graphic designer. Sorry, this is kind of biased towards graphic design because these were my students. So Malika is an illustrator now. She does an awful lot of work for the New York Times, the New Yorker. She is a really prolific illustrator. If you look at her website, you can see what her website is here. If you look at her website, you'll recognize an awful lot of the work that she's made. And yeah, this is from Vimeo, but again, not going to work, but it's lovely because you get to see her and you get to see her talk about her work and her kind of interests and influences. George, another interesting one, I think. George studied computer animation arts, and what he has gone on to do is work in computer games. And so the last time I heard from him, he was working for this company called Cubic Motion, and one of the games that Cubic Motion worked on, and they're a kind of sub-consultant, a bit like I was in architecture. So one of the games that they worked on and George worked on was Spider-Man for Sony PlayStation 4. So yeah, a really interesting title with amazing kind of lighting effects, which is the area that George has specialized in. Something that you might recognize, work by Chris Cox, another graduate from graphic design. He works for a company called Us2 now, and Us2 do lots of things actually, including mobile games. This game took the world by storm and surprise. This is the highest grossing game in China, iOS game in China, making the studio a huge amount of money. So they've done incredibly well. Richard Lyons. So there was a big new update to Apple, the kind of Apple desktop iOS operating system last week. Richard, another graduate of mine from graphic design in Farnham, he works for Apple in California now, and he's part of the team responsible for the human interface guidelines. So he worked on the new kind of operating system. So yeah, doing super work. And then some other things from other courses, actually, that you might recognize. So Laura Naylor, she she's an animator, but actually she's a 2D animator. She worked on some of the 2D animation for Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs. She's also one of the animators for this, Simon's Cat. Mark Waring, he has done a lot of work with Wes Anderson. So he was the director of animation for Isle of Dogs. He was also the director of animation on Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. This. So another graduate from UCA, from the animation course in Farnham, as is Grant Orchard. So Grant Orchard is responsible for the little guy in the bottom right, a guy called Hey Dougie, him. I haven't included him in this presentation, but Mark, who's the creator of Peppa Pig, is also a graduate from UCA Farnham. And it's a shame these aren't going to work. So maybe, or one of our most high-profile graduates is a guy called Gareth Edwards. And so Gareth, he started off directing a really interesting film called Monsters that had great special effects on a really, really tight budget. And then he hit the big time, really through that. So he directed Godzilla, and then he directed Star Wars: The Force Awakens. So yeah, he's done it incredibly well. Okay, so that was a briefish introduction to me and UCA. I'm now gonna switch presentations. If you have any questions, I don't know if you have yet, but if you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask as well. So hopefully you can see this. Oh, I can see I've got one question. Brilliant. And I'll come back to that a bit later.
Sorry, Ginny, I couldn't see the PowerPoint. I think it's a bit blank for me. I'm not quite sure for everybody.
Okay. This often happens when I'm presenting from a... Can you see it now? No.
Not yet.
I'll give it another go. Share screen. You can see it there.
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do it full screen because I think I might lose it again. So, portfolio advice. And I kind of feel like there's an awful lot to tell you. And also it's kind of fairly simple. So it's one of those kind of odd conversations, I think. Maybe it's more about me kind of reassuring you. Okay. And I think maybe I'll begin by talking about what a portfolio is, because, you know, of course, it's a collection of your work. It's a collection of the things that you've done. And when you're collecting together this information to submit an application to a university, it can feel quite kind of daunting. And of course, it can feel daunting because you don't really know what to include. All of the kind of requirements as to what to include are on our website under the specific course page. But also it can feel quite daunting because it's a representation of you. You know, this is a representation of who you are. And I think in the creative arts, this can be quite difficult often. You know, whatever it is that you produce, it's almost like a piece of you, a slice of you. And when you're presenting it to someone else for their kind of approval, that can feel quite difficult. I would encourage you, though, to think of your portfolio for application to a university as a tool. It's a tool. It's just the thing that you need to produce to you know, get a place on the course that you want to study. It's a tool. We all have portfolios too. Everyone who works in the creative industries will have a portfolio. You know, our portfolio will differ depending on our kind of subject area and the material that we produce, but we'll all have a portfolio. There are bits of my portfolio that go all the way back to, there's 2 bits in my portfolio that go all the way back to when I was kind of 18 years old. The reason they're still in there is that they help me tell a story about how I've ended up here. They illustrate my kind of early interests, I suppose. And so for you, you might have the same. You know, some things that you include in your portfolio now, you might still be showing when you're 50, which is a kind of daunting thought. Anyway, portfolio advice. Your portfolio does demonstrate a range of skills and creative talents. So what does that mean? And why is this important? We need to know that you can use the tools that you'll need to use if you want to study a particular course. So an example of this is if you want to study computer games, we'd like to see that you've used some of the technology that you'll need to use when you study computer games. And this can be at an incredibly basic level. You know, you don't need to be making a computer game. You just need to have been, you know, maybe you've made some kind of assets for a computer game, for example. Okay, so through your portfolio, you will demonstrate to us who you are as an individual. You'll show us your creativity. You'll indicate to us your kind of inspiration, who you look at for kind of reference, and you'll show us some of your artistic abilities. So let's break these down a bit. Show us your individuality. This is show us who you are. And you show us who you are through that kind of mix of things that you're interested in. So you might be interested in, you want to study architecture, but you're also interested in photography, and you're interested in the natural world, and you're interested in poetry. You show us this through the portfolio that you put together. I think it is through this kind of combination of things, this combination of inspirations, that kind of creativity happens. So creativity is that kind of leap, isn't it? From the things that you know already to the things that you don't, you kind of speculate. And you'll show us your artistic abilities. And so, not using a computer games reference, this will be your drawing. This will be your photography skills. This is kind of skill-based, your ability. Your portfolio really is about you. Absolutely about you. We want to see who you are. We are really interested in you as an individual. And so you'll show us your creative journey. So for every project that you've ever worked on, I'm sure, you know, you've got a brief or you've got a thought. It might be a kind of self-initiated brief. You go and collect stuff, you discount some of it, you speculate, you make some things, you evaluate those, you make them better, then you have an outcome. We'd like to see that through your portfolio, that journey. That will show us your thought processes, that journey. That will indicate to us, you know, how you've done something, how you've gone about doing something. Another way of showing us your thought processes and your creative journey is through your sketchbook or notes or whatever it is that you do throughout a project that you're working on. And it is really important that you consider the audience or the viewer of your portfolio. For most international applications, it will be the program director or the head of school will be reviewing your portfolio. So think about them. It will be, you know, maybe it'll be someone a bit like me. Be bold, you know, appeal to them, and be bold through the presentation of your work. Aim to hold their attention. You know, you want them to kind of engage in your work and be interested in you. You want to show your creative potential to us. You want to show your creative potential. You want to show your creative potential. You want to leave us wanting to meet you. you want to leave us wanting to see more. Okay, so portfolio requirements. These are specific requirements. So every course has a different set of portfolio requirements. Even if the course titles are similar, we recommend that you have a look at the specific course that you want to apply for, because there might be something specific that that course requires. And you find this by looking at the relevant course page online. What you do then is you tailor your portfolio to the course. And you do a couple of things here. So in terms of tailoring, you're likely to need to edit down some of your work. And there may be pieces of work that you might want to kind of amplify. So for example, if late at the day you've decided that you want to study photography rather than fine art that you've always wanted to study, you're going to want to take some of your photographs or retake some of your photographs and kind of present them as the most important thing in your portfolio. For you guys, if you're applying from overseas, you'll submit a digital portfolio to us, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. Okay, so we're getting more and more specific now in terms of this presentation. So your portfolio is typically going to be 16 to 20 pieces of work, typically. You know, I've seen portfolios with 6 pieces of work, but for each of those 6 pieces of work, there's quite a lot of development. And I've also seen portfolios with 60 pieces of work, and that's a problem, quite frankly. I really would suggest that you edit down the number of pieces. Your portfolio is about your work, it's not about the portfolio. So keep the presentation simple and let the work speak for itself. There will be, I'm sure there will be a need for captions somewhere, but keep your captions brief, I would suggest. Clean. Yeah, think about the order that you show your work in. So an awful lot of portfolios that we see are presented in chronological order. So it's the first piece of work to the last piece of work. But think about whether that's the best way to show your work. Maybe the last piece of work isn't that strong. Maybe you need to kind of shuffle things around. Maybe you can tell a different story about your work through shuffling things around. Yeah, one of my colleagues often talks about this. Maybe think of your work as a piece of music. You know, maybe thinking about it having 3 verses, and within the verses there's a kind of chorus or a link or something. So what would that look like in terms of your portfolio? That would give it a rhythm, wouldn't it? And you know, when you think about the viewer, again, someone like me, that kind of rhythm is really useful. You know, it's knowing when to kind of pause. It's knowing when to read. So yeah, consider the rhythm of your portfolio. Okay, so this slide really is for students who come to campus for interview, but I think it's also useful for you when writing kind of captions or explaining your work. You know why you've done the piece of work that you've done. Know why you've done it in reference to the brief, the project brief. And also it's and maybe an aside, but it's fine, not even fine, it's really good, I think, to show a piece of work. You know, if you've got a piece of work where you've clearly, or a project where you've personally learnt an awful lot, but the outcome is disappointing, you can show that to us with an evaluation or a kind of reflection on the final piece of work to tell us what you do differently. Okay, so a recap really in terms of creative journey. So we really want to see the steps that you took from your initial idea through to your outcome. This gives us an insight into how you think. This will also give us an insight in terms of your research kind of approach. It's very likely, you'll have an idea, you'll do some research, secondary research probably to start with, where you'll look at things in books, look at things on Pinterest or online. Ideally then you do some primary research, and so you go out and find things, or you're doing kind of material research where you're trying to work out how materials might work for you. Through this research, your ideas will develop. You'll then understand, or hopefully you'll understand, kind of where your work sits. Is it appropriate for the brief? Is it going to work? And through that, there will be some kind of reflection and probably remaking, and then there'll be a final outcome. So yeah, seeing this kind of process, or a process similar to this, is really useful for us. And then some might say the journey is more important than the final outcome. We always say this, don't we? And I think it really is. In education, it really is. It's through the journey that you do all of your learning. Okay, so create the right portfolio for your course. And to start with, though, we're just going to differentiate between different levels. At the university, we have kind of 4 different levels, but we'll only talk about the first 2. The kind of pre-degree level, further education and foundation, and then we'll talk about degree level. So at pre-degree level, we're looking at your drawing. You'll see that there's a kind of common thread throughout all of our courses. We want to see that you're interested in lots of stuff, a varied interest in a range of subjects. And the subjects can be, as I alluded to earlier, pretty diverse. We're interested in music and literature and fine art and fashion, and all of these things might make up your portfolio for pre-degree level. We're interested to see you using a sketchbook, and through your sketchbook kind of exploring. We're interested to see you using different materials and different approaches to those materials. So you don't need to use materials in a kind of conventional way. And the same is true for technology. You don't need to use technology in a conventional way. And then we're looking for work that is kind of appropriate in terms of its scale. So not just kind of A4 or not just screen sized, but we're looking at work that that is the most appropriate scale for the brief. Okay, so undergraduate level. So this is if you are applying for a degree level course, undergraduate level. So here we're interested in here we want to see a portfolio that's more kind of specific. We want to see it directed towards the course that you want to study. So the guide here is that you aim for 70% focus on the subject that you wish to study. And this is a guide. This is a guide. And so I've seen portfolios with an awful lot less than this. And I've seen portfolios that are exclusively related to graphic design, for example. We want to see your creative thinking, your investigation, and how you develop a project. And so this is back to sketchbooks again, really. You'll show us these things through your sketchbook. You'll use different materials and different technologies. And again, you'll include a mixture of work at different scales. Okay, so now these are some of the threads that are appropriate to all courses. So all of our creative courses, I should have mentioned this earlier actually, not all of our courses require a portfolio, but nearly all of our courses require a portfolio. All of our creative courses do. And so this is where you need to check the website. But all of our courses are interested in drawing and seeing your drawing. Your drawing as well is likely to be different depending on the course that you want to study. But drawing is, you know, such an important way for us to communicate ideas to each other, that it's common across all courses. Digital work is something that's common across all courses as well, of course. How do you show digital work? And so if it's digital drawing, you know, you might want to print them out or save them as a PDF and show us your PDFs. Often though, digital work moves, or it kind of changes, or it reacts or something. And so you might just want to send us a link to that particular piece of work. And it might be a link to your blog, or it might be YouTube or Vimeo, or, you know, there's a multitude of different ways of showing your digital work. Sketchbooks. I've talked about sketchbooks so much now, haven't I? How do you present your sketchbooks though? You present the sketchbooks. You can present the sketchbooks in different ways. One of the things you could do is, you know, you could photograph spreads from your sketchbook, and you could present us with the whole thing. Maybe it's a separate PDF that accompanies your portfolio. Maybe what you do is you take snapshots, and then between each of your projects in your portfolio, you've got snapshots from your sketchbook that give us an idea of how you got there, your kind of thinking. So it's kind of sandwiched between your kind of polished work, I suppose. I think that the way that you present your sketchbook as well digitally, it can feel sketchbookish. So if the final outcomes, you know, they're beautiful, they're really kind of polished, the images of your sketchbook, they can feel like, you know, not actually look like Polaroids, but they could feel like Polaroids. You know, they don't have to have that same level of kind of finish, I suppose. When you're photographing individual things from your sketchbook too, you can reorder things. You know, you can tweak the story, which is also an interesting thing to do. Okay, so research. Yeah, we're interested to see your research. You know, we all do research to kind of inform our ideas, to find out about stuff, to kind of test our assumptions, I suppose. It's really important that you show your research to us. Through showing us your research, it will give us an idea of the people that you're interested in. So this will give us an idea of your understanding of the kind of industry, the creative industry that you want to work in. I get really excited when people take references from a range of different sources, often outside of their kind of chosen subject area. I think that's really interesting. So yeah, you've got kind of permission to do this. You'll also, through your research, you'll show us or demonstrate your knowledge of contemporary practitioners. You'll also demonstrate your knowledge of kind of historic practitioners, you know, people who are maybe the kind of founders of the subject. Yeah, and you'll show us a kind of broad contextual kind of understanding of the subject. Okay, so I'm going to talk only for a few more minutes. And what I want to do here is just to give a couple of examples of how portfolios differ. So to start with, film and TV. So film and TV, what do you need to include here in your portfolio? You're likely to have storyboards, you might have scripts, you are likely to have your original films or animations or your sound recordings. If you have films, animations or sound recordings, then you'll need to show these to us in a different way. Of course, you can't show them through a PDF, and so you'll point us in the direction of a YouTube channel or Vimeo or a music clip, whatever it might be. You may also have written work for film and TV. And so, yeah, feel free. You're very welcome to. Please do submit this. Yeah, so these are some of the areas that we're interested in. Fashion and textiles. So here, drawing is super important. We're interested in your figure drawing, your flat drawings. We're also interested in your sewing. So your kind of understanding of materials and kind of processes. I'm going to flick through. So graphic design. Again, we're interested in your drawing. We're interested in your kind of interest in type. And so this might not be font design, but it's very likely to be your kind of creative applications of typography. So it might be scaling things up, scaling things down, making things beautifully kind of readable or illegible. It doesn't really matter. Architecture and interior design, just because I noticed the question. So here we're interested in your kind of spatial awareness. So you'll demonstrate this to us through kind of 3D work. This might be sculptures, or it might be something else, model making. These models can be very kind of conceptual. Drawing, again, so we're really interested in your drawing. It can be, it probably is largely from life, but also kind of conceptual drawings, photography and digital skills too. And I think I'll do one more, this one. So craft and product design. So for craft and product design, we're interested in your kind of hands-on making. So the maquettes that you make. We're interested in your kind of understanding of process. So this might be through your making, or it might be through your sketchbook. And we're interested to see you testing and experimenting in terms of the forms that you make, the prototypes that you make. We're interested to see your ideas and where they come from, and your interest in materials. So I think that's almost it. Finally though, just tips for digital portfolios. If you've got three-dimensional work, actually also if you've got flat work that's large, you'll need to photograph it. So spend time taking those photographs. Make sure that you're showing off your work as best as you possibly can. You can compile your work, your flat pieces of work, your photographs into a PDF. I'd recommend that you do this really. Through the PDFs, you can also have notes. There can be captions on each of the pages. Yeah, be critical in your notes. What might you do differently if you were to do things again? What other materials might you try? What other research might you look at? Yeah, ask yourself these kind of critical questions and tell us. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is finish there so that we've got time for questions. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for sticking with me. Hopefully that was useful. And I've got a few questions.
Yes, I think we have some questions.
We are.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry,
it's
okay.
Okay.
The pigeon flying back door. Yeah, I think we have I have answered the question about requirement study architecture. Student looking at bachelor degree already replied that. And another question student asking lately is about what is the best website or app for digital portfolio. Do you know anything about that, Jimmy?
So if your work is flat work, or photographs or things that aren't moving, I would suggest putting together your portfolio and saving it as a PDF. And so you can do that in lots of different ways. But that would be my suggestion, because then anyone can open it. Yeah, anyone can open it. If it's moving image work, then I would suggest that you, I mean, my preference is a link through to Vimeo or YouTube. In YouTube, the work can be private, so you don't have to show it to everyone, but that might be the way to do it. And the other thing is, sometimes, less often now, but sometimes we see work on websites, people's personal websites or blogs. But really the most reliable, I would say, is through a PDF sent to us, and then links for moving image work to Vimeo or YouTube. But yes, set the permissions to private if you don't want to show them off. I can see as well, is there a contemporary art course? Yes, there is. We have 2 contemporary art courses, undergraduate level. So we have the fine art course in Canterbury, and we have the fine art course in Farnham. The kind of flavors of fine art are a little bit different, actually, between the campuses. At the moment, this may well, it kind of evolves all the time, I guess, depending on staff. But at the moment, the course in Canterbury is a bit more interested in kind of materials and processes, whereas the course in Farnham has been really quite kind of conceptual, but exciting because of that. Then there's a question about, would it help to study design, not specialise before diving into architecture? Well, it would help, and it depends what you're currently doing. And so, so quite a lot of our students in architecture, students coming from the UK actually, have already done a foundation course before doing an architecture degree. So it would help, although it's not a requirement. So it kind of depends, I suppose, on how confident you are, and how confident you are and your portfolio, because there's nothing stopping you going straight to study architecture. I would also say, I mean, this isn't a kind of UCA thing, but you have different flavors of architecture course. And so some are very creative and some are very much more kind of related to kind of engineering. Our course is very much more creative. And then, does different schools have different requirements for the same course portfolio? Yeah, they do. And so at UCA though, it's always worth checking, but all 3 of our graphic design courses require the same thing. So that's useful. So you could apply for all 3 graphic design courses, for example. But if you compare our requirements to another university's requirements, it's very likely to be different. There'll be crossovers, and there'll be kind of common ground, but there might be something specific that we look for. So with, if you were studying jewelry, for example, or wanted to study jewelry in Farnham, there are going to be some specific things that we're interested to see. If you were to apply to a different jewelry course, and because our course is very kind of materials focused and really quite traditional, if you're interested in another course, another university, they might not be interested in some of the kind of technical things that we're interested in. Any other questions? Oh, requirements for studying architecture. So yeah, we've done that one, haven't we? And yeah.
I think that's all the questions so far.
Yeah, so any other questions, anyone? Well, that's good. I've answered all of your questions.
Great. But if you have any question, please just go back to KALBA and they will be asking us everything and we will provide answers straight away. Yeah.
Yeah, we've just got on from Beatrice. So when do we have to submit our portfolio? Well, we have a really long application window and it depends. Yeah, so we have this long kind of application window. And I don't know off the top of my head. So Trudy, do you remember?
When do they submit their portfolio?
Yeah, when's the deadline?
Sorry?
Or maybe when's the deadline? The deadline.
Oh, the deadline. I can't remember really, not on top. But as long as if you submit your application with your portfolio together, that should be fine. Also, some students require submit another portfolio. They can just resend it again, another new one. So it really depends on each student's situation. But the good thing is if you could submit your portfolio with your application at the same time, that would be great. Yeah.
Cool.
I think that's everything.
I guess that's all. If anybody has any more questions, just type it now, or you can speak up if you would like to. But as Trudy said, if you have any questions regarding the application process, the documents, etc., you can always contact KALBA, KALBA Lithuania team or KALBA Latvian team. We will help you with pleasure. Okay, so I see that nobody is typing, and I guess all the questions are answered. So thank you, our guests. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Trudy. Thank you, everybody that has been here with us. And till next time, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, guys.
Everyone.
Lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.